The microphone does not work. Please use a microphone. Thank you very much for coming to our press conference, and I would like to say that of course you are going to be interested in Greece and other matters. I am here for the third time in Vienna because, as you all know, we are in the midst of a decisive phase on our nuclear negotiations with Iran. However, I have to tell you quite frankly that in spite of so many other topics that are right now being dealt with by the foreign ministers, it was very important to me to speak before the ambassadors of the OSCE participating states and describe our visions of the OSCE chairmanship in 2016. And it goes without saying that this is not just any period of chairmanship. It is going to be marked by very difficult times. Just a few minutes ago, at the end of the debate with the ambassadors, I told them that this is a time that will be a difficult time. It will be a difficult task to be at the helm of this organization because the success will not be easy, and it depends on many factors and actors that we cannot influence directly. On the other hand, the OSCE has stood the test of time in such a difficult period, and that's why we need to further strengthen it. At the end of my remarks, I expressed my thanks to the Swiss chair. Switzerland made a large contribution during a time when the Ukraine crisis broke out and became a great impediment to European security, when Crimea was the subject of annexation and when conflict broke out in eastern Ukraine. And that's why I expressed my special gratitude to Switzerland, because Switzerland was able not only to offer its mediation efforts, but also to make the OSCE perform a role of bridge building in order to find alternative solutions to the crisis. Of course, we are still far away from a complete implementation of the Minsk agreements. This has to be stated, unfortunately, and I'm telling you this as a member of other negotiating formats, such as the Normandy format, where we regularly meet with Ukraine and Russia. However, I don't want to start to imagine where the conflict in Ukraine would be without the OSCE. Without the OSCE, that was prepared to assist with an observation mission, with a monitoring mission, in order to verify the allegations that were made on both sides. If the OSCE had not been prepared to assist in the ceasefire, if the OSCE had not existed to help mediate negotiations on local ceasefires, the OSCE has contributed enormous expertise to all these efforts. And that's why I think this morning we still can reaffirm that the annexation of Crimea is a blatant violation of OSCE principles, especially the principle of inviolability of borders, and that all this ended up in a political crisis in Europe. All these statements are still valid, and nevertheless, especially in times of crisis, we must make use of the ability of the OSCE to diffuse tensions. We need the OSCE in a political dimension when it comes to exercising influence over states, and I know how difficult this is, not only for us, but the OSCE itself as an organization. However, this morning I used my statement to clearly specify one point. In a situation where we have to realize that the estrangement between states has increased, it is important that the OSCE becomes more active in the second dimension, namely to prevent estrangement, alienation between individuals, between societies, and that is why the dialogue between representatives of the civil society and an exchange on an equal footing, all these factors are of particular importance and are probably more important than ever. And this exchange is very significant and very important because some other threats have not disappeared just because right now we have to concentrate on Ukraine and the Ukrainian crisis. All the other problems, starting from extremism to discrimination, anti-Semitism, all these issues that were discussed in OSCE fora are still in existence, and they still threaten the lives and the existence of individuals in the OSCE area. And that is why it is a very important task that we need to support during the next year when we will be at the helm of this organization. I also reminded the audience today that topics that seemingly belonged to a different century, that such topics are still in the headlines of newspapers, and I'm afraid not only of German newspapers, but all over Europe, that topics such as arms control, of course, are still very topical parts of our agenda, in particular because the current situation has revived old reflexes from the Cold War, has revitalized the old Cold War concepts and ideas, and that's why we must not forget that arms control is also part of the OSCE, was part of the OSCE, and will have to remain part of the OSCE. We must prevent that the Ukraine crisis and that the serious differences in opinion, the serious disagreements on the Ukraine crisis might lead to a rearmament in Europe, to a new arms race in Europe. This must be prevented. And that's why the dialogue that was so typical of the OSCE in the past must also mean a dialogue on a military level. And this expertise should not be lost. And that's why I still support the possibility and opportunity for dialogue. Where we have them, we need to use it. Of course, there are serious tests that we face not only in Europe, but also if we look beyond the borders of Europe. Such threats are very serious. The attacks in France, Kuwait, and elsewhere have reminded us of that. During recent days, international terrorism, unfortunately, has assumed an ever greater significance compared to several years ago. In the end, terrorism does not only pose a threat to the Middle East and to Northern Africa. In a globalized world where distances due to new forms of communication have become less relevant, such threats might spread to other regions that are very close to us. And that's why the OSCE must also take up the topic of international terrorism, not only during the next year of our chairmanship, but also beyond that. And that's why I'm very happy that even before our chairmanship in 2016, a conference with OSCE partner states will take place in October in Jordan. Several weeks ago, I visited Jordan, and I know that this country looks forward to this conference. More than that, Jordan prepares this conference very actively with other Mediterranean countries. Dialogue, trust, and confidence. Those are the slogans that we are going to pursue during the next year, together with our partners in the Troika, with Serbia and Austria. Those are our common goals in the Troika. We are going to work with full commitment, which will be more required than ever in troubled times when the OSCE and its participating states are facing so many threats that I described only some of them today. Thank you. The gentleman in the second row, please say your name.
Le Monde. Mr. Steinmeier, can I ask you a couple of questions on the Iranian nuclear talks? How close are we or aren't we to a deal, according to you? And can you give us some insight into the answers that Mr. Zarif brought back from his trip to Tehran? Thank you.
Ja, die Verhandlungen.
The negotiations are so difficult. The negotiations are not only very extended in time, but they are extremely difficult, as all of you know, and that's why I ask for your understanding that we cannot conduct these negotiations in the public but behind closed doors. All I can assure you is that my impression is that all of us here in Vienna, including Iran, have arrived here and are seriously prepared to come to a result. This was the impression that we got during the beginning of this week. Now our experts are consulting, and they also have involved scientists. They work under great pressure and in a very committed way. And our target is to follow up to the principles of Lausanne, which were important pillars, to refine them and to, on this basis, to form a document. I'm optimistic that we will arrive at that today with the 3 EU foreign ministers. We will have a meeting together with Ms. Mogherini, the EU representative, and I will get a clearer picture of the status quo. However, I must mention, and I think this was the aim of your question, that we have not arrived at the end result yet, because there are some smaller and larger obstacles that we are trying to remove. But I must say that now, after 6 years of being a foreign minister and after many years of experience in negotiations on the nuclear deal with Iran, I participated for the first time in nuclear negotiations with Iran in 2005. So based on my long-standing experience and my efforts to arrive at a solution, I can tell you that even if the path is now seemingly short, and if the number of obstacles might seem a lot fewer than 3 or 4 years ago, I am convinced that in spite of all that, the last steps will be the most difficult steps, and that's why all I can tell you right now is that all parties to this process are seriously engaged. They take all efforts that are required. However, I cannot predict whether there will be sufficient courage and determinateness on all sides.
Allgemeine Zeitung. Auch zu
Löwenstein from Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. There were efforts to conduct the negotiations elsewhere in Lausanne or Geneva. Now these negotiations are held in Vienna. Could you describe the atmosphere of the negotiations in Vienna? Why did you choose Vienna?
Sie richtig gesagt haben.
As you quite accurately mentioned, the negotiations during the past 2 years took place at 3 different places: Lausanne, Geneva, and Vienna. Some of you will remember that previous negotiations have been held in Vienna. All I can say is the great hospitality that we enjoy in Vienna, and I would like to mention this quite frankly, is certainly one of the reasons why we selected Vienna as a venue for these negotiations, because the atmosphere here in the city is very conducive to a result. And also the external circumstances at Palais Coburg, where it is possible to hold confidential negotiations. And that's why such conditions are very favorable for the multiple rounds of negotiations that we need to hold between ministers, between experts, and on other levels. And I really hope that we will be successful. Jakovlevich from RRD. A question on Greece. And thank you for being so interested in OSCE matters. Well, you said it yourself, Mr. Steinmeier, that of course everyone is interested in Greece. What is your assessment of the situation? Negotiations with Athens are now interrupted. How do you assess this? Well, frankly speaking, I cannot decipher the behavior of the Greek government anymore, I must say. I don't know which part of that is strategy, and I don't even know whether Greece itself has arrived at a decision on how to continue work after Sunday. And that's why all I can say is that on part of the European Union, on the part of the member states, we are not able to make progress, and we now need to wait for the decision of the Greek people during the referendum. Only after that we can decide.